Okay, so we're doing the shir for the refuah of Rivka Batshira, and we're just going to start off quickly, Kev, with an idea or two, and then we'll get cracking straight in the Gemara. There's a lot to cover.
Okay, so I don't know if you guys know, every couple of years you have to get your tefillin checked. And my good friend Simeon in Ranana told it to me, and Julie had it done, and I went to the one Chabadja, the one drove up the road, and certain things with tefillin. I don't know if you guys know, just one or two. I won't be too long. The box, the actual where the parchment is kept on the shell rosh or the shell yados, but particularly the shell rosh, it has to be completely square and symmetrical. If it's slightly out of shape, it actually isn't kosher, and people don't realize it. And luckily mine was just about kosher. So the box, just check your boxes that they're symmetrical and completely square and that the straps can't have cracks in. You can actually get this like Tipex, this black paint. You can paint over the straps, but eventually the straps have to be replaced also. And so the Rav said to me, every 3 or 4 years, you need to get your tefillin checked.
So thanks for
I don't
telling
know
me.
if you guys knew that.
No, I didn't. So I think I heard it. I think Damon once told me, but I forgot about it because of my condition. So I'm going to take it soon. Thank you. It's a good reminder. Thank you, Kevin.
And Chabad is always helpful. Chabad,
I've sent,
they even gave me a spare pair. The one Chabad, the guy here, gave me his spare pair to use while it was getting repaired.
Kev, I've sent on the group 22 pages of the halachic specifications needed to check if your tefillin are correct.
Or
So
you can outsource it. So I'll outsource it. 22 pages is too much.
yeah, no. So just
Yeah.
listen. I went to Rabbi
A
Gary.
Rov, the Rov will do it because it depends. There might be leniencies also. Certain things,
Cost me like
uh,
half grand to keep mine repaired, but after 25 years, it was worth it. He didn't overcharge because they have to charge to check straps, etc.
yeah.
It was worth it. I think firearm costs less, but this gives you divine protection, so it's pretty cool too. And let's get started. Kevin,
It
thank you.
puts a spiritual fire into your arm. You said a
Exactly.
firearm.
Yeah, that's good. I can't beat that.
So,
Uh,
can't beat that. Yeah, well done. That was a good one.
I can't beat that. Okay, so I'm gonna I just share the screen
Kevin's
quickly.
on fire today,
Uh,
eh?
yeah. Um,
Uh, Guys, this is going to go on forever. Let's start. Yeah.
all right, so guys, just quickly in the Mishnah, if two witnesses says we testify about this man that he owes his fellow 200 zuz, they were found to be conspiring witnesses. They receive lashes for their false testimony, and they pay their victim what they intended to make him lose, because the pasuk that makes them liable to lashes is not the one that makes them liable to payment for the reciprocal penalty. Why do they get the reciprocal penalty? Because they sought to cost this individual 200 zuz. Why do they actually get uh, lashes? Because thou shalt not testify against thy neighbor. It's the ninth commandment. And then since the penalty is derived from two different pasukim, both must be carried out. Those are the words of Rabbi Meir. And the sages say whoever pays does not need to receive lashes. So, according to the rabbis, a person cannot be liable to both lashes and monetary payment for violating the same prohibition. Okay, then there's a second case. And this is a case where you're not dealing with two separate punishments. They both would get a set of 40 lashes. One, because you're accusing somebody of breaking a negative commandment that would warrant that amount of lashes, 39. And therefore, you breaking the pasuk, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor in Shmot chapter 20, verse 13 in Exodus. And then the second one is you're receiving that because, so in other words, the first one, because you're bearing false witness against your neighbor. The second one, because you're seeking to have the defendant pay a penalty of lashes for breaking a negative commandment. So that's a reciprocal penalty. So the words of Rabbi Meir is each of the false witnesses get two sets of lashes for each contravention of the pasuk, which are different. The sages say they receive only a single set of 40 lashes, and that goes under the hazama, which is the reciprocal penalty for conspiring witnesses, but nothing for transgressing the prohibition against false testimony. Okay, so the cases are very similar. Why did I want to share the Mishnah? Because I shared it yesterday. Just I always feel that when it puts somebody back in the headspace, then immediately you can get into the Gemara quickly. So, the Gemara wants to seek some understanding of the reasoning between the view of the rabbis compared to the view of Rabbi Meir. Okay? Now, what's the view of the rabbis? That the witnesses do not pay the hazama penalty and receive lashes as well. And it's actually understandable because it's written in the verse concerning lashes, and we did this, I shared that in Sepharia, which was not exactly the Stony Dish of Chumash, but we do know that if you look at Devarim Deuteronomy chapter 25, verse 2, I'm hearing something in the background. I don't know, is it me? I'm just hearing somebody's marks on. I'm not sure it is. So, basically, it's mentioned in Kesubos in 32a, and when we look at the Parsha, it's got this word rishato. So rishato is the singular form of the word wickedness. So what does that imply? That when malchus or lashes are called for, the guilty Eidim Zomimim can only be held liable for one punishment. So according to the rabbis, this limitation is actually a general rule that bars the conjunction of malchus and monetary penalty. And where does this mention it? Guys, it focuses on ketubos or kesubos, depending if you're Ashkenazi or Sephardic, 32a. I went through that last time, and I went through also that the fact that the scriptural basis for applying the monetary punishment to Zomimim witnesses rather than the malchus. So, because in this particular first case of the Mishnah, that's what they sought to do to their victims. So that's put as an emphasis that if you can only choose one, and we're dealing specifically with Eidim Zomimim, although it falls under the broader category of bearing false testimony, the specific category is actually conspiring witnesses according to Rashi, and therefore we focus on the monetary punishment because it's reciprocal in this manner. And we use that pasuk which talks about a singular form of wickedness. So there's a similar principle that you can derive it from another source, and this is if you look in Kesubos 37, both Aleph and Bet, the entire daf deals with it. And what it does do is it precludes a person receiving the dual penalties of execution and payment, or, for example, execution and lashes. So where did we see this, guys? If any of you attended Sanhedrin with Rav Simcha Steinhauer, you've got Kimle B'di Rabbi Minei, meaning, again, you only pay the greater penalty. So we discussed time and time again that if you had the right sort of warnings, that you burnt a Picasso on Shabbos, then you violated the Shabbos and burnt a $20 million piece of artwork at the same time. And because it's in the same time period, in other words, the two transgressions occurred simultaneously, the punishment of the monetary compensation is waived in favor of the fact that we choose the greater punishment, which would be the death penalty. So he wouldn't have to pay for the Picasso. So somebody once asked me, they said, but how would he pay for it if he gets the death penalty? And all I said is, look, the court can, before they kill a person, they can either attach assets from the living person's bank accounts or asset seizure, or from the heirs, whether the death occurs before and afterwards. They choose not to. And it's the same thing when you've got a death penalty and lashes. The person doesn't get lashed before they've been put to death. However, receiving more than one set of lashes is not excluded in this principle. Okay, this is what you've got to bear in mind. That's why the second part of the Mishnah came about, because they're both the same type of punishment. So there is a discussion in Moed Katan in 2b that if there's a same punishment, you don't have the principle of Kim Lebedi Rabamine, which means the smaller punishment is waived for a bigger punishment. Same thing if they're two death and death sentences, because this person decided to have an incestuous relationship and rob a bank and murder somebody, is what you call a multitasking habitual criminal that has a proclivity for his sister. We only give the more stringent death penalty, since that would be a kapora for both. But if they're both malchus, you can give the same sort of punishment twice. This is opinion of the Rashash and Tosfot in Moed Katan. Obviously, it doesn't work for the death penalty because, let's face it, it's a one-time affair. It's like jumping out of a helicopter and your parachute doesn't work. It's a one-time hobby. Okay. So the Gemara is going to have to give another reason why the sages don't assign lashes for violating the prohibition of false testimony. In other words, according to the Ritva, we sincerely learn that the sages definitely hold up this principle of the wickedness as a singular case, and therefore you can only punish once. All right. So if you look at it, just remember the source, Devarim, Deuteronomy chapter 25, verse 2, that teaches you can hold him liable for one wickedness, but you cannot hold him liable for two wickednesses, meaning you can't subject him to two different penalties for one deed. But how does Rabbi Meir learn it? In other words, what's his reason for mandating two punishments for the single deed? In other words, why doesn't he accept the same as the sages, the scriptural derivation that one punishment is the limit, and read the word wickedness in its single definition as the rabbis do? And Ulla answers this question, defending Rabbi Meir, and he said, look, Rabbi Meir derives it from a different law, and that is the law of one who defames his wife. Okay, so if you look at Devarim, Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 13 to 19, we actually went through the sources in Sepharia last week. And what we did do is I showed you that what does it discuss? It decrees that malchus or lashes for a man who marries a girl. And there are a couple of criteria. Firstly, she has to be a Nara. What's a Nara? A girl in the first 6 months of puberty, and who basically he's not enamored with her personality, and he wants to get out of the relationship. So he basically in a court defames her by fraudulently trying to prove in court that she was unfaithful during the Erusin period, which is, guys, the betrothal period. And where do you find this? In Kesuvos. All of this is outlined in there in terms of Eidim Zomamim, multiple punishments, etc. But this is in Kesuvos 46a. Now, Kevin asked a good question last time. Kevin says, well, basically, what happens to her in not a case of Eidim Zomamim, but if he's successful? And Kevin, what I mentioned to you at the time, because you suggested that there might be a financial penalty from her. No, she's proved to have had an affair even during that period. She gets the death penalty. And ironically, it's a more stringent death penalty for a Nara in the Rusin period than there is for a woman that's not that's a full woman. In other words, 12 and a half with at least two pubic hairs, etc., and is not in the betrothal period, but is in actual fact fully married. So this punishment is more stringent in terms of which death penalty. How do I know? We looked at that in Tosfot in the beginning when we dealt with a bus Cohen. Okay. Anyway, it doesn't turn out good for her if it works. There's two different types of death penalty. In this particular case, the more stringent one. So, what do we do to put him off? Because her reputation will be in tatters. Even if she's proved to be innocent, your reputation can follow you. So the Torah decrees that he be fined 100 silver shekels. And that has to be paid to the girl's father. Why? Because of her young age. She's actually still in the legal custody prior to her marriage. Okay? And then he obviously gets lashes. So in other words, the penalty of the payment goes to the father for his embarrassment, and the guy gets lashes as a deterrent. So they're two different penalties. So Ulla's using this in terms of Rabbi Meir as a proof that you can in fact get two different penalties for the same sort of crime. And obviously, they both fall under the statutes of, in a way, false testimony, because what is a defamer? He's just using words in order to convict this woman. There's no particular action he's taking. Okay, so I think I've made that fairly clear. The reason, Kevin, by the way, that I thought it was a good idea now that you started is the minute we've got on YouTube today, they've got CC, which is closed caption. If we have any new people that want to obviously report us on YouTube, and they've got most people have a very short attention span. So if in the first few minutes they hear about a girl that's basically living with her father and is in the first 6 months of puberty, we're going to be kicked off YouTube quicker than you can scream pedophile. So it was a different time. Okay. So I'm saying.
Let me just say something quickly, just from an AI perspective. AI now, I told you already, it can transcript all these YouTube videos. And this year is going to go leaps and bounds ahead. So all our stuff is going into the AI world. So the last thing we want is something that's completely hectic from our side.
Okay, but your standard reply is like Clinton. We did not have sexual relations with that woman.
But you got to qualify yourself in. So while we're being transcribed, that into AI, that it's that we qualify.
Listen, this is Torah. The first thing of it is what you got to bear in mind, Gavin, and the YouTube listeners should know, is that the reason why people were in such a hurry to get married is the first 6 months of puberty, when the couple, it didn't necessarily mean she would be pregnant, but they might certainly have had a bit of intimacy. But within the first year, when her womb and uterus developed to the degree where it could carry a child, and by the time she was at least 13 and a half, 14, she would get married. It's not that odd. Even if you look at Romeo and Juliet, when we learnt it at school, he was 13 and she was 12, and they spoke their undying love for each other because people would live till 30. And they'd get tonsillitis, quinsy, or the plague would take them and they wouldn't live a long life expectancy. So the minute they hit sexual puberty, where they were able to bear children, they got married and propagated. It was practical. It wasn't pedophilia. It was carrying on with the next generation. That's it. It was a very different time.
Yeah.
Any questions before we proceed? Because I want to get back on the Gemara. You're on mute.
So Damon,
Hang
just
on,
going
Lance
back
wanted
to
ask
the
some-
Lance wants a question.
You talk about the age being up to 30, but was that relevant to like us as well? Jewish people who, like the plague, for instance, affected them more than us because we had laws of cleanliness which they didn't have, so we lived longer. But when you look at the Avot, it talks about 75 being a good age and 80 being this age. People lived longer. I don't know if we used to live until 30.
Okay, so Lance is bringing up a good point historically. I saw a BBC documentary. I know we're diverting a bit, but this is important. Is that they actually, during the Roman times, when the Talmud was written, by the way, and Pirkei Avot was developed in the it was, I think, articulated as part of Nizikin just a few hundred years before the Common Era. I call it not era. Um, that basically people's life expectancy, the Romans and the Greeks, they had bathhouses, they kept cleanliness, and generally the lifespan was better. During the Middle Ages, where people went from an agricultural lifestyle to earning a living, working in cities, especially with the Industrial Revolution, disease, population, large populations, etc., and things like that. The lifespan actually deteriorated in the Middle Ages, particularly because there was a lot of accusations of witchcraft, and medicine went from basically, you went from basically astrology to astronomy. In other words, you took almost folklore and you made it something of investigating the astrological patterning of stars, not based on personality or character traits, but actually the position when you had Isaac Newton, etc. And then you had alchemy, which was turning obviously metal into golds and all sorts of superstitious things into proper chemistry. So what happened is obviously medicine wasn't in the realm of witchcraft. It became understanding diseases and taking things on a more scientific basis. But the Middle Ages is probably when the life expectancy, when Shakespeare was around, deteriorated to that degree. In terms of Lance's question, it makes his question stronger. Then, since people lived a bit longer during the Roman era, why did they want people to get married so early? So Lance is correct in that the cleanliness habits certainly helps to ward off a certain degree of infection. However, because of the lack of modern medicine such as penicillin, something that was relatively minor could get out of control rather quickly, and it would be a life end. So, in other words, like quinsy, which comes from tonsillitis, where your esophagus closes up, within about 3 days, a person could die. Today, we boil water and we deal with issues like where you don't have dysentery, or you've got certain habits where you had Joseph Lister, who had surgical ways to sterilize equipment with ultraviolet light, etc. When they performed surgery, if you look at Florence Nightingale, she killed more people than she saved, because even during the period of the Victorian period in World War One, there was so much rife disease that patients died not of war wounds but of infection. So the thing of it is, Lance, even in those days, the encouragement was, from a Judaic perspective, is that if adolescence kicks in and you're not married in Kedusha, you're going to fool around and then create sexual sins. So you might as well focus it in the realm of Kedusha, get married as quickly as possible, have children as quickly as possible, because we can't predict the future. And anybody where their hormones are raging and you want to exacerbate that period before they get married, they're bound to have sexual activity prior to marriage. And the Torah wanted to halachically discourage that. Am I making sense, guys, in terms of my answer?
Yeah.
Any
Yeah,
questions,
especially
Lance?
the last part.
Yeah.
Makes the most sense.
I think one thing that one can add in that is, having more kids, you're more wealthy, you're more blessed as well.
Yeah, there was also a high level, Brendan, of infant mortality. Lance, if you have a look,
Yeah, that's
even in the Roman era, because there's infanticide and gericide. You were legally allowed to kill if you had too many infants, because they were a financial drain, and old people that don't earn are a financial drain. It was part of law that if you couldn't fend for yourself and contribute to the family, you were easy pickings. It wasn't against the law. But if you have chlamydia, which by the way was only sorted out post World War One, just before World War Two, where many even affluent people died, where women died during childbirth. These issues were definitely around during the Roman and Greek period, during the Talmudic period. So it was encouraged because a woman could die during pregnancy that she start as early as possible. And the main issue is from a point of kedusha is that when hormones kick in, you want to eliminate any avera. Okay, let's go on to the Gemara. Have I answered your question to satisfaction, Lance? Kevin had a question. Kevin?
Yeah, so just to so if a Nara is accused of being of infidelity, and it's not the case, in a normally she would get the death penalty, but the guy gets. But if it's obviously unproven, the accuser gets lashes. Is that correct?
Yeah, he gets more than lashes. He gives the father whose house she was staying at before when they got engaged during the betrothal Erusin period, she gives the husband gives the father 100 silver shekels, and he gets lashes for defaming her. It's both penalties.
Yeah, I can't get the death penalty because it didn't.
Yeah, and there's another implication. He can never divorce her. So if she irritated him in the first 6 months, he's got help. No, really.
Yeah.
He's gonna have to. He can never divorce her. So I mean that's enough of a deterrent. The lashes are nothing. Right. Let me just go
Yeah.
through some aspects quickly of the Gemara. We've got 10 minutes. All of your questions have been good and they're important. So basically, Rabbi Meir, Rav Ulla said in defense of Rabbi Meir that he derived it from the law of one who defames his wife. Just as one who defames his wife receives lashes and pays, since the Torah explicitly decrees both punishments for this offense, so to anyone who commits an act that carries the penalty of both lashes and a monetary payment receives lashes and pays. In other words, if we look at Devarim chapter 22, verse 13 to 19, not every case would carry two penalties, but in cases that do, both penalties are meted out. And what Rabbi Meir is saying here is that it's the same thing. We can use this with Eidim Zomamim, that the reciprocal penalty is 200 zuz, so each conspiring witness pays 100 zuz, and they get lashed because they transgress the negative commandment, he shall not falsely testify against his neighbor. But the Gemara's got a problem with this. What's the problem? Is that, look, how can you compare the case of a defamer, which is a fine, and therefore can't serve as a model for Zomamim? Okay? So I just want to explain to you what they mean by this. If I want to teach you a law and say that if you reverse in my car and you've cost me 6,000 Rand, then since you damaged me to a certain value, it's up to you to make restitution at the value to repair what you damaged. And therefore, since that's compensation, we can learn in another case where you cost the person 20 grand in damages because you didn't reverse in a parking lot, but you actually hit them at a speed, then so too you should pay that amount. In other words, it's a logical principle of compensation regardless of the amount. But when you've got what you call a knas, a fine, as opposed to mammon compensation, you can't serve it as a model for laws which don't share that novelty. So what's novel about a fine? Well, there's certain things, is that generally it's a fixed payment. Like in the case of a defamer, you've got 100 silver shekels as well as lashes. So how do you know in another case that you can learn, even though there are lashes for generally breaking a negative commandment, how do you know there might be a fine associated with another crime? And even if there is, how do you know there might not be an extra stringency because this new young girl that got married after 6 months is traumatized, she might lose her life. And therefore, it's particularly stringent in this case, and a fine is meted out so as no embarrassment occurs to the father and your reputation is restored. So how do you learn a principle that is punitive to other cases? That's the argument. Compensation, we agree. You can extrapolate once a principle from another. And also fine you don't pay by your own admission. What do you mean? He shall pay double. In other words, you pay the compensatory amount and the fine is equal to the amount that you stole. So how do you take that unique feature and apply it necessarily to a similar case? Because now suddenly if you steal a sheep, you pay fourfold, which is the compensation, and another penalty, which is 3 times the amount of the compensatory amount. And when you steal an ox, it's 4 times the penalty and 1 times the compensation amount. So you pay 5 times and less for the sheep, not because of the weight, because Gavin said that originally, and I said to Gavin, it doesn't matter, because if you're paying the value of the animal, they weigh the animal and they look at the breed of the animal. So whether it's a goat, a sheep, or whatever, they look at the breed and the weight, and you pay proportionately anyway. And so to the penalty proportionately anyway. But we're saying the reason why you pay less for a sheep is because you have to carry it over your shoulder with the stench in it. So as opposed to a cow, which you can't put on your shoulder unless you're Ronnie Coleman, you have to lead it out with dignity on a thing. You don't feel embarrassment, whereas when you steal a sheep, that embarrassment constricts the amount of penalty you have to pay. So you say, well, in this case, you pay 4 times. In that case, you pay 5 times. In the case of he shall pay double, you pay twice. How do you learn any principle of a fine and pay it in another case where it might be a fine? How do you know what to pay, especially if it's a fixed amount? Especially by your own admission, you don't have to pay if you pay back the compensation. So we generally don't learn and extrapolate cases of law where there's a punitive fine given to another case of law. So that's the argument that the Gemara seems to have so far, is that how can you compare this case of a defamer, which is a farm, and let it serve as a model for Adam Zobamim? Why? So I'm going to explain it to you. Let's just see how much time we've got. We've got 4 minutes. So the Gemara basically replies and says, look, if you look at Rabbi Meir, he holds the exact same position as Rabbi Akiva. And he says that the punishment imposed on Zomimim witnesses is also a fine, okay, and thus comparable to the case of one who defames his wife. So you can say there, you can learn it. In other words, if one's a case of compensation and one's a case of a fine, you can't extrapolate the one from the other. But because it's a case similar, in other words, false testimony created this sort of issue, then for sure you can learn a case of a fine from a fine. Because why does Rabbi Akiva say it was a fine? We said yesterday, because even though the person gave the judge gave the verdict that the defendant must pay that and was given a guilty sentence, that sentence wasn't carried out yet, and therefore he didn't have to pay it. So since the victim or the defendant didn't have to pay it, that the money that's awarded to him from the Adam Zomamim is a penalty, because it's not compensation for losses. The second set of witnesses came against the first set of witnesses. Only does that trigger a payment by the Adam Zomamim, not if they come before because the case is thrown out of court, and not if they come after because we don't give the reciprocal punishment to the Adam Zomamim at the point where the verdict is meted out as punishment. And therefore, it hasn't actually cost the victim anything. And therefore, it's kind of punitive in nature. It's not compensatory. We're not talking about stress. I'm saying it didn't physically cost him money. And therefore, Rabbi Akiva holds it's a fine, Rabbi Meir holds it's a fine, and then they both say you can learn a case of a fine from a fine, because both of them are non-actions, both of them are false testimony. And you can say that Rabbi Meir says, listen, you're transgressing, do not testify falsely against your neighbor. And then a different pasuk, you do to them as they intended to do to their brother, which means there's a penalty payment with regards to that, and the other one incurs lashes. And the same thing with the defamer is 100 shekels is paid to the girl's father and 40 lashes for the false testimony and negative transgression. So you can learn the principle of a fine from a fine as long as Rabbi Meir is holding that, in fact, he sees it the same way as Rabbi Akiva, which he does. All right, guys, we're done for the day. Any questions?
One thing, Damon.
Yeah,
Damon, look about a sheep and a cow. A cow is not a herd animal, where a sheep has to be let out. Like you never see one guy leading around a sheep. They're always in packs. That's when embarrassment comes in because you actually have to physically lift the creature.
exactly.
Where a cow, you can take one at a time. People wouldn't notice it. So
That's absolutely
that's another way of looking at it.
true. People wouldn't lead one sheep. They would have obviously what you call those dogs, and yeah, lead them together. You don't do and a cow you can't have in your shoulders anyway. Exactly. Can have the world on your shoulders. That's called stress, but you can't have a cow on your shoulders. All right, guys, have a good day, and please God a refuah for Rivka Bas Shira, and I wish you all blessings. Have a good day, guys.
Shkach. Shalom.
You too.
Thanks, bro.